It's so good that autumn has come. Now it'll be easier for me and my mother to live. Thank you, Lord, for giving us the strength to make it through this time without starving to death. The short, brown-eyed woman whispered quietly to herself as she stood with a heavy cart at the path that led to a small wooden church on the outskirts of town. Not far from it, and she lived in an old barracks with her mother, Barnadette Hart. Olivia had tied to her cart a large net of potatoes, which she had just bought at the market and was now taking home, because autumn was the reason that root vegetables were so cheap, and that even the nurse at the local hospital could afford them. Although, of course, even in the summertime, under normal circumstances of life, Olivia could easily buy the cherished crops, because if a person does not have enough money even for potatoes, then why should she work at all? However, it wasn't that easy for the woman. Salary, of course, as well as all the nursing staff of the hospital, she was not more and not less than the government established. That is the very minimum. But she did not have enough money to live. And this, despite the fact that her mother received a good income as a veteran of labor, more than 40 years of working as a painter at the cement plants. The reason for this lack of money was simple, and it was not because Olivia was a party girl, or worse yet, someone who wasted all her money on a cherished bottle. It was the fact that Bernadette had recently been diagnosed with an incurable disease that was making the poor woman miserable. Strong painkillers were needed to alleviate the pain, but the ones that the state provided for free were akin to vitamins and did not help at all to alleviate the pensioner's pain. Other imported drugs were required, and their cost was appropriate. The little Ampulse now took up her entire pension and most of her daughter's salary, and after the utilities, which Olivia always paid like a sacred debt on the first day, she had very little money left. It was barely enough to buy the essentials at the store, just to keep from starving to death. The usual groceries set for women consisted of pasta, which stick together when cooked into a huge slimy lump, slimy, baggy-smelling tea, barley or oatmeal, and, of course, bread. On big holidays, Olivia spoiled herself and her mother with broth and chicken backs or stewed potatoes with pork stew. That was how this simple family lived with no one to help them. Olivia had long since forgotten about her new clothes, wearing the one she had worn in her youth, when she had dated a very nice guy from the grocery store. Kenneth had sworn infinite love for her, but as soon as he found out his girlfriend was pregnant, he left town. And she was very fond of him. Perhaps that is why, because of the terrible experiences and her lost child, Olivia. After all, she did not even think to go to the antenatal clinic, as Kenneth advised her, to their own hands to destroy the life she had no right to take. Almost went crazy with grief, and if it were not for the help and support of the closest person to her, no one knows what she would have dared. More than 10 years had since passed, but Olivia was still inconsolable. In all these years, she had never let a mare near her, fearing that any of them might break her heart again. And a year ago, Olivia had been so worried about her daughter and Bernadette, telling her that Kenneth had left another gullible woman. Even in the next town, the man had once again managed to leave a bad name for himself. However, Olivia had long ago forgotten about the wayward beau. She just did not want to get burned again, and a year ago, as if from a clear sky, sounded the verdict of her mother, who, somehow, returning from the farmer's market right in the street, lost consciousness. And it is good that there was a nurse nearby. She literally pulled her mother out of the grave, restarting the stopped heart. Only since then, poor Bernadette, being forever bedridden, dreamed only of one thing, that as soon as possible ended all this nightmare, and her girl was finally free from the terrible burden that she had to put on her neck. Many times, Olivia was suggested by so-called good counselors to get rid of her mother by putting her in a nursing home or hospice, wherever as long as she could breathe freely again. But the woman told these counselors to go to hell, telling them that her mother had given her life and raised her, and that if she had done as they advised, she would never have forgiven herself. And so the two women lived in misery, hunger, cramped and damped housing. But they had nothing to resent each other, because each of them did everything in her power to make them as happy as possible. And now, Olivia was carrying a real treat for her mother, vanilla marshmallows. She bought just one piece at the market. She had no more money, and she had to live to her next paycheck. But the woman could not resist to please her mother with something. In addition, there would be a cup of tea with sweets waiting for her today. Finally, after a little rest, the woman continued on her way. 10 minutes later, she reached a 2-story gray building, which was sagging so badly that it was about to collapse on the heads of its occupants. However, the danger was not so great, because almost all the tenants had moved out of the building long ago, having lost all hope that the state would provide them with new housing. The only people left in the house were those who had nowhere else to go, destitute people like herself and her mother, Olivia thought wistfully, carefully dragging the potatoes to the shed next to the house. Not a single tuber could be damaged after all. It was her and her mother's food for the next month. After that, the woman climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor and unlocked the plywood door, upholstered with leatherette, and entered the poorly furnished apartment, where in half an hour a real aroma was heard from the cramped kitchen, which made the stomach ache, but of course only for those whom the best dish could be boiled potatoes. After feeding her mother, giving her an evening bath, and kissing her tenderly goodbye, the woman went on night duty to the hospital. The good thing was that it was also located near her house, but at the same time in a very unfavorable and sinister place, next door to the city dump, the powerful smell from which often reached the medical institution, obviously not contributing to the recovery of patients. In addition, in the hope of getting something of value, some suspicious, marginal-looking individuals often hung around the hospital, frightening patients and medical staff alike. How many times did people complain about this outrage to the city authorities? But it was all to no avail. The old mayor, who had been sitting in a warm place for 10 years, didn't care about the problems of his native city, because apparently, for his high services to the electorate, Mr. Horace Henderson went straight to the governor's. And the new mayor clearly didn't have time to get into the swing of things. Well, however, the citizens didn't have much hope for changes, because how many of these mayors were replaced over the years, and the city still hasn't changed for the better. However, people were wrong in their assumptions, because the young mayor zealously took up his duties. The first thing he did was to clean up his own administration, because according to his sources, the head who had come from the capital knew that even the small officials were mired in corruption, not to mention those on whose decisions depended the fate of the person who had applied for a solution. The servants of the people who had been thrown out into the street were furious, because usually, in such cases, they would have been offered another, usually even warmer place. And here, the new mayor had done such outrageous things. Even the former head of the economy department, a short, black-haired man with constantly running eyes, had to go to the governor himself for help, especially after he heard that Mr. Clifford Paul, the new mayor's name, had taken over the financial records. That's when Horace Henderson turned white with fear, for if some of his dealings with foreign investors come out, not only his chair would shake under him, but he would be thrown out of it, most likely to the places not so distant. It was time to act urgently, and by very cardinal methods. It was here that he came up with a wonderful idea, a terrific plan for which he had only to go to one of the city dumps, and then talk to the mayor in earnest. It was just before Olivia's night shift that the governor and the mayor had their most serious conversation in the relaxed surroundings of the official's country cottage. He tried to convince the overly frisky subordinate that he was wrong, but eventually, losing all hope of success, Horace Henderson went to Plan B, immediately after the mayor left, dialing the phone number of his security chief. "Proceed," was his only command. "Got it," replied clearly and in army fashion the retired military. It was already dusk when Olivia, having scrubbed the floors of the cardiology ward, left the hospital to take the garbage to the dumpster located just outside the fence of the institution. However, as soon as a nurse threw her precious cargo on the container, as soon as it almost did not recoil from him, because it literally crawled out of him some dirty, grimy homeless man in shreds of clothes. "Help me," the man whispered, barely breathing, and then collapsed unconscious. The nurse had learned the rules of first aid very well during her time at the hospital. She could not leave a man, even the lowest class, to die in the street, because not so long ago, exactly the same simple bystander had saved her mother. Here, it was as if God himself had sent her to help an unfortunate man who had also stopped his heart, and the symptoms were all there. Olivia rushed to the victim, and despite the fact that he was covered in sewage, began to give him artificial respiration and non-direct heart massage. Fortunately, after a few minutes, to her great joy, his heart began to work. "You lie here for a while, man. I'll be right there," she shouted, rushing to the department for a stretcher, calling from the post of a surprised and sleepy nurse, the doctor on duty, who at the time was having a nice conversation in the department with his wife, who worked there, which of course enraged this doctor. Where do you see a nurse handing out jobs to doctors? Dr. Eric Gibson was even more enraged when he saw who the woman had brought to his ward, almost making him sick. However, fortunately, he still remembered the oath made in the university, so with a heavy heart, he took the homeless man to surgery, after which he told Olivia all what he thought about her. "Why did you bring that filthy ragamuffin into my ward? Now we'll have to disinfect the whole place because of you. Maybe he's rabid too. Anyway, we'll get lice from this gift of yours." That's the man. He's a human being like you and me. So the fact that he has no home deprives him of the right to save his life because he got sick in front of me? The nurse tried to justify herself. "If we had given up, they would have thrown him in the trash, and that would have been the end of it. There would be one less scum in the world, and then he's going to die in my office, having to fill out a lot of paperwork and talk to the police, and he doesn't even have any documents." Dr. Eric Gibson continued to rage, but soon, remembering his wife, quickly retreated. Olivia was simply shocked. She did not understand how you can so treat people, whoever they were. Only in the morning, the head doctor of the hospital himself explained to her what she should have done in this situation. "So, the whole town is fighting to keep these scum of the earth out of our clinic, and you're luring them in? Come and see us, you vagrants. Every drunkard will be picked up, washed, warmed, and put to bed." The expensive perfumed doctor yelled like a hacker. But then, the woman's nerves failed. She could no longer tolerate such lawlessness, so she expressed to Eric Gibson all that she thought about it in the mildest way possible. The head doctor was almost dumbfounded. He was almost taken aback when the doctor in charge, an ordinary nurse, told him how to treat patients in the hospital. He resolved the problem on the spot by firing the stricken woman. Olivia had not expected such a reaction to the usual truth. She realized with horror that his decision had left her and her mother with no right to live, depriving her of all hope. With tears in her eyes, she begged Dr. Eric Gibson to leave her, but he was unwavering. "Get out of my office," he barked, thus ending the conversation. Only a week had passed since then. Olivia had said nothing to her mother about her dismissal, for if she found it, it might just finish the poor woman off. The woman had some money for the first time, for she had received her paycheck when she was fired. However, the poor woman was in despair, now every day, as if going to work from home. She frantically went around all organizations in search of jobs, but all to no avail. She was rejected everywhere, even for the dirtiest of jobs. But after a few days, everything literally turned upside down for the family. On Friday night, Olivia returned home, sadly thinking, "This is the end. Soon, there will be nothing to buy medicine for my mother. When we run out of potatoes, we will have nothing to eat, and then they will kick us out of the apartments." But when she reached her doorway, she almost fainted when she saw a vagrant she had served, dressed to perfection, and he came out with a huge bouquet of flowers from a fancy car, and the words, "Let me thank you." Clifford Paul walked up to the nurse. Yes, she had saved the mayor himself from certain death. Therein lay the governor's cunning plan. While still in his position of mayor, once visiting the dumpster behind which the homeless lived at the request of his citizens, he personally spoke to each of them, threatening reprisals if they did not get out of there. Of course, they did not, but he remembered one of them, a particularly zealous one. And when the governor saw the new mayor, he remembered David from the landfill because he was like two peas in a pod, a true double. So the governor offered him a chance to be mayor for a small sum of money. At that, his main goal was to compromise the official by various machinations, which the double started to do successfully. And the real mayor should now, disguised as a bum to rot in a landfill, because during the tea party, the governor slipped poison in his cup, and after worked his criminal security service. What was Clifford Paul's surprise when he woke up a day later in the hospital disguised as a homeless man? That's when he escaped from there, going straight to the Metropolitan State Security Committee. The governor and the enterprising David were caught red-handed at City Hall, and they were surprised to see two mayors at once. Fortunately, the corruption of the area was over for the time being. Now all Clifford Paul had to do was find the nurse who had saved him. The mayor was furious when he found out how the management of the hospital thanked a capable employee. Not enough after the chief physician, demoted to the rank and file therapist, did not seem to be enough. But the most important thing for Olivia was that soon her life changed dramatically. To begin with, Clifford Paul offered the woman the position of head of the household at City Hall. Then suddenly, she found a brand new apartment instead of the horror in which she and her mother were living. And then, Bernadette was sent to the Capitol for an examination, which showed that with proper treatment, the chance of healing is very high. And in fact, it was given to her as such an opportunity for the daughter of the grateful mayor. And soon, Clifford Paul came to the pensioner to ask for her daughter's hand in marriage. At first, only a feeling of gratitude guided the man, but the hardened bachelor carrier realized that he would not find a better lady than Olivia, because she gave him the very hope for life, and it was worth a lot.